Imagine a grand party filled with the richest families in town, glittering diamonds, flowing champagne, and powerful people laughing under crystal chandeliers. But in the middle of all the glamour, a little boy in a wheelchair suddenly screams one word that freezes everyone in shock. "Mommy!" And when the guests turn to see who he's calling, it's not a socialite, not a queen of the elite, but the maid. What happens next will leave you breathless. The Fraga mansion glittered that evening like a palace carved from dreams. 3-story windows spilled golden light into the manicured gardens, where limousines lined the circular driveway, and valets hurried to collect keys from men in tailored tuxedos. Inside, the grand ballroom breathed elegance, Italian marble floors polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers raining crystal firelight down onto gowns stitched in Paris, suits cut in Milan, jewels glittering like tiny galaxies. It was the event of the year. The 10th anniversary of Fraga construction, the empire that Caio Fraga had built with sharp instincts and relentless drive. 200 guests, politicians eager for campaign funds, CEOs craving contracts, socialites with diamonds heavier than mortgages, mingled beneath soaring ceilings, sipping French champagne that cost more per bottle than most families earned in a month. Conversations flowed about mergers and markets, whispered rumors of affairs, casual boasts about vacation homes in Miami, and then a single cry shattered the symphony of wealth. "Mommy! Mommy, Valentina!" The voice pierced through string music and laughter, small but fierce, like a flare shot into the sky. The room froze. 100 champagne glasses stopped midway to painted lips. A ripple of silence swept across the marble floor. Heads turned in unison toward the sound, as if the entire ballroom had been choreographed for this one impossible moment. At the center of it stood 7-year-old Matthew Fraga. His blonde hair glowed beneath the chandelier, his thin arms flailed desperately, and his wheelchair trembled as he tried to launch himself forward. His bright blue eyes shone wet with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy. Opposite him, clutching a tray that shook like an earthquake in her hands, stood Valentina Silva, the maid. Only 27, with brown hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, she had been gliding unnoticed through the party, serving bottled water while waiters in crisp uniforms floated past with silver platters. She had no jewels, no designer gown, only quiet humility, and the faint shadow of exhaustion in her eyes. Matthew didn't care. He reached for her as though the universe had just returned something he thought was lost forever. "You came, Mommy Valentina. I've been waiting all day." The words struck the room like thunder. Gasps slipped from ruby-painted mouths. Businessmen blinked in disbelief. Politicians exchanged startled glances. A child with cerebral palsy, calling the maid his mother, in front of 200 of the city's most powerful people. It was scandal. Heartbreak and miracle all at once. Across the room, Caio Fraga felt his world tilt. At 34, he was the definition of control. Broad-shouldered in a midnight tux, brown eyes that could silence a boardroom, voice that could move millions in contracts. Yet as he held his glass of champagne, the crystal slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the marble. Golden liquid spread across the floor like wasted fortune. His heart tightened. For nearly 2 years, since the night a car accident stole his wife Livia, Matthew had been locked inside himself, retreating from the world like a wounded shell. No laughter, no joy, only silence and shadows. Yet here he was, glowing like sunlight, calling someone Mom. "Mommy, aren't you going to hug me?" Matthew's voice broke into sobs, his arms straining forward. Valentina's lips parted soundlessly. She looked at Caio, her eyes wide with panic, begging for an answer. Should she ignore him, pretend she hadn't heard, and keep serving water? Or should she step into a role that society would never allow her to claim? The silence grew suffocating. Whispers hissed like sparks catching fire. "She's just the maid." "The boy is confused, poor child. This is shameful." And then Caio moved. A small nod, barely visible to anyone but her. permission, the tray rattled onto the nearest table, bottles clinking like wind chimes. Valentina crossed the marble floor in trembling steps. Matthew lunged forward into her embrace, burying his face against her shoulder, clinging as if he had found his home after a storm. "Mommy's here, my prince," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears pooling in her eyes. "Mommy's here with you." The embrace lasted only moments, but in those moments the ballroom burned alive with whispers. The mighty and the rich muttered, scandal dripping from their tongues, and standing among them, Fabiana Fraga, Livia's twin sister, felt fury rise like molten lava. She had spent weeks preparing for this night, every curl of her hair, every shimmer of her crimson gown, worth more than a brand new car, her face painted by the city's most exclusive artist. She had moved through the ballroom like a queen, soaking in praise for her devotion to Caio and Matthew, but now every eye had turned away from her. To the maid, to Valentina, what made Fabiana tremble most wasn't the scandal, nor the whispers. It was the look she caught on Caio's face, a look she knew too well. It was the same look of deep, helpless love he once reserved only for her sister. The night of the gala did not end when Valentina pushed Matthew's wheelchair out of the glittering ballroom. For the guests, whispers trailed them like smoke. For Caio, it was the start of a firestorm he could not put out. The mansion's marble walls, once proud and polished, now seemed to echo with judgment. The sound of heels on the floor, the rustle of silk gowns, the muttered words, the maid, the child, the scandal, burned into his ears. Fabiana stood rooted to the floor. Her manicured fingers curled around the stem of her champagne flute. Rage vibrated through her body. She had crafted this night like an artist. The flowers imported from Colombia, the string quartet flown from New York, the menu curated by a celebrity chef. She had worn her sister's heirloom ruby earrings just to remind everyone that she belonged to the Fraga legacy. For hours, people had whispered admiration into her ears. "You're holding the family together so gracefully. Fabiana, you're practically Mrs. Fraga already." And then that maid, plain, trembling, with no makeup and cheap shoes, had stolen everything. But what made Fabiana's blood boil hotter than anything else was Caio. She had memorized every flicker of his expression since Livia's death, the hollow grief, the quiet gratitude when she cooked his meals, the way he leaned on her during business dinners. Tonight, however, she saw something new. She saw his eyes lock onto Valentina with a tenderness he hadn't shown anyone in 2 years. It was the exact same look he had once reserved for her twin sister, Fabiana's eternal rival. Her nails dug crescents into her palm as she smiled politely at passing guests, disguising the volcano beneath. Upstairs, Matthew chattered happily as Valentina guided his wheelchair down the long hall. He pointed at the balloons tied along the staircase, at the musicians' instruments left in the corner, at the flowers that decorated the gallery. "Mommy, did you see the violin? It sounded like birds." Valentina's throat tightened, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "Yes, sweetheart. It was beautiful, wasn't it? You'll tell me a story tonight, right? Like the one about the paper airplanes?" "I will," she whispered, brushing his blonde hair from his forehead. "I promise." She wheeled him into his room, walls painted sky blue, toy shelves lined with untouched puzzles and books. The boy's world was full of treasures, but empty of laughter. Until her. Now, as he clung to her, whispering, "Don't leave, Mommy," she felt the unbearable weight of the moment. She was just a maid, paid to clean and serve, but to this child she was something sacred, irreplaceable. Caio returned to the ballroom to finish his duties as host. He shook hands, nodded, forced smiles. Every word spoken to him blurred into white noise. He heard none of it. His eyes kept drifting toward the empty hallway where Valentina and Matthew had disappeared. His chest ached with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude that Matthew had finally smiled again. Guilt that it took another woman, not him, not his family, to light that smile. When the last guest left, the mansion fell into an uneasy silence. Fabiana approached him, her perfume sharp, her smile brittle. "Caio, we need to talk," he sighed, loosening his tie. "Not tonight, Fabiana. It's been a long night. Exactly, she pressed, her voice low, urgent. And you need to see what just happened for what it really is. That maid, she humiliated you in front of the entire city. Caio's eyes darkened. She didn't humiliate me. She comforted my son. Comfort. Fabiana's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call it? She manipulated him, Caio. She let him call her mom. He called her that on his own, Caio cut in, his voice sharp. Fabiana blinked. The steel in his tone startled her. You're blind, she snapped. You can't see that she's wrapping herself around him, and you, because she wants more than a paycheck. People like her always want more. Enough, Caio warned, his jaw clenched. Don't talk about her like that. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. For the first time, Fabiana realized she was losing her grip on him. The very thing she had spent 2 years building, her presence in this house, her quiet claim to his life, was slipping through her manicured fingers. 8 months earlier, the maid had first entered their lives. It was a cold March morning, rain falling in fine soaking sheets. Valentina had arrived late, hair dripping from the broken bus she had ridden across the city. Fabiana had opened the door with a sour expression, already judging. 20 minutes late. The agency said you were punctual. I'm sorry, ma'am. The bus broke down. It won't happen again. Fabiana's eyes scanned her up and down. Plain blouse, worn shoes, hands calloused from labor. No threat, she thought. Perfect, invisible. She led Valentina through the mansion like a queen touring her kingdom. The grand library that reached the ceiling. The polished offices, the endless bedrooms. Valentina's eyes widened with awe, but not envy. This house is so beautiful, she whispered softly, almost reverently. Fabiana caught the sincerity and sneered inwardly. Admiration is harmless. Gratitude is useful. Then they entered the game room. That was where Valentina first saw him, little Matthew, pale and lonely, sitting in his wheelchair by the window. His blue eyes stared out at the rain, as though waiting for something that would never come. That's my nephew, Fabiana said flatly. He was born with cerebral palsy. He doesn't walk. Best not to bother him. He doesn't like strangers, but Valentina couldn't look away. She saw not a boy to avoid, but a soul abandoned. She carried that image with her the entire day, and when she finally left, squeezed between strangers on a crowded bus, her heart wasn't filled with the promise of steady work. It was filled with the memory of a lonely child staring into the rain. From that day forward, a bond grew in secret corners of the mansion. Valentina dusting the grand shelves, while Matthew pushed toy cars that broke too easily. She patched them up with tape, her laughter gentle and unpretentious. She folded laundry while telling him stories of her childhood, tales of paper kites and stolen mangoes. He listened, wide-eyed, because she spoke to him not as a fragile patient but as a boy, and Caio noticed. He'd walk past the game room and hear Matthew's laughter echoing, laughter he hadn't heard in 2 years. At first it filled him with gratitude, then with confusion, then with something else, something dangerous, longing. Fabiana noticed too. From the window, she watched Valentina crouched in the garden, teaching Matthew about roses. She watched Caio linger in doorways, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. And in those moments, Fabiana's jealousy hardened into something poisonous she had lost to her sister in life. She would not lose to the maid. And so on the night of the gala, when the boy's cry cracked the walls of high society, when Caio's eyes glistened with emotion, when Valentina dared to hug him in front of them all, Fabiana realized her silent war had begun. She smiled sweetly as Caio excused himself to check on his son. Then she turned toward the staircase, her heels clicking like daggers on the marble. She doesn't know who she's dealing with, Fabiana thought, her rage masked behind a flawless smile. But she will. The war for the heart of the Fraga mansion had just been declared. The mansion at night was always quiet once the guests were gone, but after the gala it felt like a battlefield after war. The polished marble floor still bore faint stains of spilled champagne, crushed flower petals lay forgotten beneath chairs, and the echo of whispers still lingered in the corners of the grand hall. For Caio, silence was heavier than any noise. He sat alone in the study, tie loosened, head in his hands, replaying the night again and again, the cry of his son, the scandalous hug, the spark in Matthew's eyes, the murmurs of 200 witnesses. He should have been furious, he thought. Furious that his carefully cultivated image, his company's reputation, his social standing had been shaken in a single moment. But he wasn't. Instead, he felt something else, something far more dangerous. Relief. Relief that his son had smiled. Relief that even for a few minutes Matthew had been a child again. Yet that relief came with a storm of guilt. Why had it taken the maid, Valentina, to reach his son when neither he nor doctors nor Fabiana had been able to? He had given his boy the best therapists, the best toys, the best home. But none of it had worked. And then this woman, simple, poor, unknown, she had given him something priceless, joy. Upstairs, in the quiet blue room, Valentina sat on the edge of Matthew's bed. The boy had refused to sleep until she told him a story. He clung to her hand with fragile fingers, his eyes wide and expectant. Once upon a time, she began softly, there was a little bird who thought he could never fly. His wings were weak, his heart was heavy, and he stayed on the ground while all the other birds soared above. Matthew listened, lips parted, breath shallow with anticipation. But one day, she continued, a gentle wind whispered to him, try, even if you fall, try again. And so the little bird spread his wings. He wobbled, he stumbled, but with every try he grew stronger. And finally, he flew? Matthew interrupted, eyes sparkling. Yes, sweetheart. He flew higher than all the others, because he had learned what it meant to be brave. Matthew sighed happily, snuggling into his pillow. You're the wind, Mommy Valentina. You helped me fly. Her throat tightened, tears burning her eyes. She kissed his forehead. And you, my prince, are the bravest bird I've ever known. When his breathing slowed, when his grip on her hand softened into sleep, Valentina sat a while longer, brushing his hair back, listening to the fragile rhythm of his breath. She knew she was crossing lines she could never uncross. She was just the maid, and yet in his heart she was already mother. Across the hall, Fabiana paced her room like a caged predator. Her dress lay discarded across a velvet chair, her jewelry scattered across the vanity like weapons abandoned after battle. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, flawless hair, perfect makeup, a face sculpted by money and attention. And yet, what had it gotten her? She clenched the edge of the vanity until her knuckles turned white. She had been everything since Livia's death, caretaker, organizer, confidant. She had run Caio's household, watched over Matthew, soothed guests, balanced accounts. She had slipped into the role of wife without the title, certain that time and patience would yield what she craved most, Caio's love. But tonight had shattered that illusion. She saw the look in his eyes when he watched Valentina. That look, raw, vulnerable, worshipful, was the same look he once gave Livia. Never her. Fabiana's jealousy wasn't new. She had lived in its shadow her whole life. Livia, her twin, had always been brighter, warmer, more beloved. Parents praised her, boys courted her, teachers adored her. And when Caio, the most eligible man in the city, had chosen Livia, Fabiana had swallowed her envy with a smile, pretending joy at the wedding while her heart cracked like glass. But she endured. She waited. And when fate cruelly took Livia in that car accident, Fabiana had thought at last her chance had come. She would step in, not out of greed but out of destiny. She would raise Matthew, she would support Caio, and slowly, gently, he would see her. He would love her, but instead he loved the maid. The thought made her stomach twist with bile. She slammed her hand against the vanity, rattling the perfume bottles. No, she hissed at her reflection. I won't let her take what's mine. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast room. Caio sat at the head of the table, unread emails open on his phone, untouched coffee steaming beside him. His mind was still lost in last night's storm. Fabiana entered, flawless again in a silk blouse, her hair perfect, her smile carefully practiced. She sat across from him, voice dripping with concern. Caio, we need to discuss what happened. He didn't look up. Not now. Yes, now, she insisted, her tone sharper. Your son is attaching himself to a woman who is nothing more than the help. He's calling her mom. Do you understand the danger in that? Caio's eyes lifted, dark and tired. Danger? He smiled, Fabiana. For the first time in years. That's not danger. That's a miracle. Fabiana leaned forward, lowering her voice. Miracles don't last. Attachments like that, when they break, will destroy him. Do you want him to feel abandoned again? Do you want him crushed when she leaves? Because she will leave, Caio. She's poor. She'll move on. She'll find another job. And then what? Your son will lose another mother. The words struck him hard. He wanted to argue, but the seed was planted. She saw it in his eyes. Think of his future, she pressed. He doesn't need fairy tales or hugs. He needs therapy, disciplined professionals. Real solutions, not a maid who makes him laugh for a few months. Caio's silence was heavy. Fabiana smiled inwardly. The first crack had formed. Valentina, unaware of the quiet war brewing, continued her morning routine. She dusted the library shelves, polished the marble, humming softly to herself. Matthew waited eagerly in the game room with his newest Lego set, watching the clock until she finished. When she entered, his face lit up. "Mommy, today we build a castle!" She knelt beside him, her laughter gentle. "Then a castle we'll build." Piece by piece they worked together. His hands struggled with the blocks, but she guided him patiently, never rushing, never pitying. Every time a wall collapsed, she said, "Castles fall so we can build them stronger." Matthew giggled, repeating her words as though they were magic. From the doorway, unseen, Caio watched. His chest ached with a feeling he could no longer deny. Gratitude, yes, but more than that, longing, desire, love, dangerous, impossible love. And from the upstairs window, Fabiana watched too. Her nails dug into the silk curtains. Rage pulsed through her like poison. She doesn't know who she's up against, Fabiana thought, eyes burning. But soon she will, because in Fabiana's mind, this was no longer about jealousy. It was about survival, and she would do whatever it took to erase Valentina from the mansion, even if it meant burning everything else down. The days after the gala unfolded like a tightening storm. The mansion's walls, once proud and silent, now seemed alive with whispers, secrets that clung to the curtains and echoed through the marble halls. Every step Valentina took, she felt eyes on her, maids glancing nervously, gardeners pretending not to stare, even the cook falling silent when she entered the kitchen. Word had spread. The scandal was no longer confined to the ballroom. It had seeped into the very bones of the house. Yet in the game room, a different world existed. Matthew waited every morning, his wheelchair parked by the window, his face pressed to the glass as if expecting her arrival. The moment Valentina stepped inside, his eyes lit up like sunrise. "Mommy Valentina, today we draw dragons," he announced one morning, crayons scattered across the table. She laughed softly, kneeling beside him. "Dragons, Fierce or friendly?" "Fierce on the outside, but kind inside. Like me." Her heart tightened, but she smiled. "Then let's make the kindest fierce dragon in the world." They spent hours coloring. Matthew giggling whenever Valentina exaggerated sound effects, roars that shook the walls, wings flapping like thunder. Each laugh was a jewel, rare and precious. And every laugh deepened Caio's silent conflict. Caio had begun to watch them in stolen moments. He told himself it was for Matthew's sake, that he needed to see how his son was progressing. But deep down he knew it was more. There was something magnetic in the way Valentina crouched beside his boy, sleeves rolled, a smudge of flour or dust on her cheek, utterly unconcerned with appearances. She spoke to Matthew as if he were whole, not broken, as if he were simply a boy, not a diagnosis. One afternoon, Caio paused outside the garden. Valentina was kneeling in the dirt, showing Matthew how to tend the roses Livia once adored. "See this one," she said, brushing soil from her hands. "It blooms because someone takes time to care. Water, sunlight, and love. Without love, even the strongest rose withers." Matthew tilted his head. "Like people?" "Exactly like people." The boy's eyes softened. "Then you're my sunshine, Mommy." Caio felt something dangerous crack open in his chest. He leaned against the doorframe, unseen, and for the first time in 2 years, his heart ached with longing, not just for his son's happiness, but for his own. Fabiana noticed everything. From the upstairs window, she had watched Valentina in the garden, laughing, her brown hair falling loose from its tie. She had seen Caio's gaze linger too long, too tender. Each glance was a blade twisting deeper into Fabiana's chest. She told herself it was rage, jealousy, betrayal. But beneath it all, it was fear. Fear that she was losing the life she had built for herself in this house. Fear that after 2 years of sacrifice, after cooking, organizing, soothing, managing, she would be replaced. Replaced not by her sister's ghost, but by a maid with nothing. That night she could not sleep. She lay in the guest room that had long ago become her home, staring at the ceiling while memories gnawed at her. When Livia died, she had stepped in willingly. She had driven Matthew to doctors, arranged Caio's schedules, managed staff who looked to her for orders. Slowly, the mansion had started to feel like hers. She told herself it was duty, but secretly she dreamed. She dreamed of walking down the staircase as Mrs. Fraga. She dreamed of Caio's gratitude softening into love, and now those dreams were collapsing. By dawn, Fabiana had made her decision. If Valentina was the threat, Valentina had to be removed. Her first strike came wrapped in concern. Over breakfast, Fabiana poured coffee for Caio, her voice calm but deliberate. "Caio, I've been thinking. Matthew is too attached to her." Caio looked up sharply. "He's finally happy. What's wrong with that?" "What's wrong," Fabiana pressed, "is that happiness built on fantasy doesn't last. He calls her Mom. Do you realize how dangerous that is for a child who already lost his real mother?" Caio frowned. The words pricked like thorns. "Imagine," she continued, lowering her voice, "what will happen when Valentina leaves. Because she will, Caio. Maids always do. New jobs, new lives. They don't stay. And then Matthew will feel abandoned again. Can you risk that?" Caio's jaw tightened. "He needs stability." "Exactly. Stability," Fabiana said smoothly. "Not illusions. Not cheap affection. He needs professionals, therapists, specialists, people trained to help him grow, not a maid telling him bedtime stories." The words were venom, but they dripped like honey. Caio didn't argue. He didn't agree either, but the silence was enough. Fabiana knew the seed had been planted. Meanwhile, Valentina remained oblivious to the tightening net around her. She went about her chores with quiet dedication, polishing silver, folding linens, humming under her breath. But the highlight of her day was always Matthew. She lived for his laughter, his questions, his fragile arms wrapping around her waist. One evening, while tidying the library, she found Matthew waiting with a puzzle spread across the carpet. "Help me, Mommy," he pleaded. "It's too hard." She knelt, fitting pieces together patiently. "See? Each piece looks strange alone. But when you put them in the right place, they make a picture." Matthew's eyes glowed. "Like us?" She paused. "Like us." From the hallway, Caio's chest tightened. Every day, Valentina made his son whole again. And every day, Caio fell deeper into the dangerous truth he tried to deny. He needed her too. Fabiana watched and plotted. At night, in the glow of her vanity mirror, she rehearsed her next move. She would not fight Valentina openly. No, that would make her seem desperate. Instead, she would strike with subtlety, with whispers, with poisoned seeds planted in Caio's heart, until the maid was nothing but a memory. Because Fabiana was not just fighting for love. She was fighting for survival, for the life she had carved from her sister's ashes. And in her mind, there was no room for both of them in the mansion. One had to go, and it would not be her. The mansion woke each morning with a rhythm as disciplined as a clock. Maids bustled through the halls with polished trays. Gardeners clipped hedges with military precision. Drivers lined up the luxury cars like soldiers awaiting orders. Yet beneath that glossy routine, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. Ever since the gala, the balance of power inside the house had shifted. And no one felt it more than Fabiana. She watched Valentina closely now. Every move catalogued, every smile toward Matthew dissected, every accidental brush of her hand near Caio scrutinized like evidence in a trial. Fabiana had lived long enough inside the mansion to know that nothing went unnoticed in the world of the rich, especially scandal. All it took was the right whisper in the right ear, and someone's reputation could collapse overnight, so she began her campaign quietly. At breakfast, one Monday, she leaned across the table, her silk blouse rustling faintly. "Caio, I made some calls this weekend. I think it's time we bring in a professional for Matthew. There's a specialist, Dr. Sandra Moreno. She's one of the best in the state for children with cerebral palsy." Caio stirred his coffee slowly, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. "He's making progress with Valentina." He laughs again. "Isn't that what matters?" "Laughter isn't therapy," Fabiana countered smoothly. "It's a distraction. You're too smart not to see the difference." Her words pricked at him. He wanted to argue, but he remembered Matthew clinging to Valentina, calling her mommy, and a fresh wave of unease washed over him. Could his son really tell the difference between comfort and cure? Fabiana pressed the advantage. "We owe him more than stories and games. We owe him a future, real progress. And if that means limiting her access, limiting." Caio's voice sharpened. Fabiana raised her hands as if soothing. "I only mean, let the professionals do their job without interference. You'll thank me one day when Matthew takes his first independent steps." The silence stretched. Fabiana sipped her coffee satisfied. A second seed had been planted. Meanwhile, Valentina knew nothing of the shadow war. To her, mornings meant polishing silverware in the dining room, afternoons scrubbing the endless marble floors, evenings folding Matthew's clothes until they smelled of lavender. But every chance she had, she found time for him. One rainy afternoon, she sat on the rug in the game room with Matthew, who was carefully stacking blocks into a crooked tower. Each time it leaned dangerously, Valentina steadied it with her hand. "See, my prince, even when it looks like it's about to fall, if someone helps, it can stand tall again." Matthew smiled, his gap-toothed grin brighter than any chandelier. "Like me, I'm the tower," she kissed the top of his head. "And I'll always be the hand to steady you." Caio, standing unseen in the doorway, felt his throat tighten. He had spent fortunes trying to give his son strength. But this maid, with nothing but patience and love, was giving him more than any money ever had. But Fabiana saw something different. From the upstairs balcony she watched, her nails digging crescents into her palms. She saw not a loving caretaker, but a rival. She saw the dangerous softness in Caio's gaze. And she knew then, Valentina wasn't just winning Matthew's heart, she was winning Caio's. That night, alone in her room, Fabiana paced like a general planning war. The rain lashed against the windows, thunder rumbling like the anger in her chest. "All my sacrifices," she muttered, staring at her reflection. "All my years holding this house together, and I'm losing to a maid who doesn't even belong here." Memories crowded her mind. Standing beside Livia at the wedding, hiding her envy behind a forced smile. Moving into the mansion after the accident, telling herself it was out of duty. Watching Caio thank her, depend on her, lean on her, and mistaking it for love. She had built her entire existence on the belief that in time he would choose her, and now he was looking at Valentina with eyes that once belonged to Livia. "No," she hissed to herself. "I won't let it happen. I can't lose again." Her plan began to take shape with calculated cruelty. The next morning, as Valentina carried laundry down the hall, Fabiana intercepted her with a smile as sharp as glass. "Valentina, a word." "Yes, ma'am?" "You've been very close with Matthew lately." Valentina hesitated, clutching the basket tighter. "He likes my company. I only want him happy." Fabiana tilted her head. "Do you think it's healthy for him to confuse you with his mother?" The words struck like a slap. "I've never told him to." "Of course not." Fabiana's smile was ice. "But children confuse things easily. And when you leave, and you will leave, what then? He'll feel abandoned all over again. You wouldn't want to be responsible for breaking his heart, would you?" Valentina's throat tightened, shame creeping in even though she had done nothing wrong. Fabiana saw the flicker of doubt and savored it like wine. Later that week, she struck again, this time in Caio's ear. "Did you know," she whispered as he reviewed papers in his study, "that Valentina sometimes sings him lullabies before bed?" "Lullabies, Caio," as if she were his mother. Caio set the papers down, his chest tightening with confusion. He remembered Matthew's laughter, the way his son clung to Valentina, but now doubt seeped in like poison. Was it healthy? Was it dangerous? Was Fabiana right? The line between love and risk blurred in his mind, and for the first time he felt afraid, not for his son's happiness, but for what might happen if that happiness was ripped away. Meanwhile, Matthew sensed none of the politics swirling around him. To him, life was simple. Mornings were brighter because Valentina came. Lunch tasted better when she sat beside him. The world felt safer when she tucked him in. One night, as she told him another story, this one about a knight who fought shadows with a lantern of love, Matthew whispered, half asleep, "Don't ever leave me, Mommy Valentina. Promise." Her heart cracked. She brushed a tear away before it fell. "I promise, my prince. I'll stay as long as I can." But even as she said the words, she felt the storm gathering. Somewhere in the house, Fabiana was sharpening knives she couldn't yet see, and so the mansion lived in dual realities. In the garden, laughter bloomed like roses in sunlight, Matthew's joy echoing through the halls. In the upstairs room, rage curdled into plots, Fabiana's jealousy festering like poison. And in the study, Caio sat torn between the two worlds, grateful for the love that healed his son, terrified of the pain that love might bring if it were ever taken away. The war had not yet exploded, but the fuse was already lit, and Valentina, caught in the middle, did not yet know that the life she had built inside the mansion stood on the edge of a cliff. The mansion carried an uneasy rhythm in the weeks that followed. To outsiders it looked unchanged, gardens trimmed, marble polished, staff gliding quietly from room to room. But beneath the surface, a current of tension ran strong, invisible yet undeniable. For Caio, every day was a tug of war between two truths: the image of his son clinging to Valentina with radiant joy, and Fabiana's poisonous warnings that such love was dangerous. One morning, as sunlight poured into the breakfast room, Caio sat at the long mahogany table with untouched toast and black coffee growing cold. His mind replayed the gala over and over, the whispers of the city's elite echoing in his head. The maid, the boy, how humiliating. He had built his company on reputation, on respectability. Could he really risk it all for the happiness of his son? Fabiana swept in, poised and polished, as though she hadn't spent half the night pacing her room in fury. She poured herself juice and spoke casually, but every word was designed like a chess move. "I've confirmed Dr. Sandra can start next week," she announced, eyes flicking to him. 3 sessions per week. Structured therapy, measurable results. Exactly what Matthew needs. Caio sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I'll consider it. You'll thank me when you see progress," she pressed, her tone firm. Then, lowering her voice, "And maybe it's time Valentina takes on fewer responsibilities with Matthew. It's not her place, Caio. She's here to clean, not to play mother." Her words echoed like a verdict. He wanted to protest, to defend Valentina, but doubt tightened around him like a chain. Meanwhile, Valentina continued her days unaware of the storm closing in. She lived for the moments with Matthew, his laughter when she made paper airplanes soar across the room, his curiosity when she taught him to fold origami birds, his joy when she told stories of her childhood. She didn't see herself as anything more than what she was, a maid who had stumbled into a child's heart. One afternoon, she found him frustrated with a puzzle, tears brimming in his eyes. "It doesn't fit, Mommy Valentina." "Nothing fits." She knelt beside him, guiding his trembling hands. "Sometimes the pieces look wrong until you find the right place. But trust me, sweetheart, every piece belongs somewhere." His eyes lifted to hers, wide and searching. "Even me?" Her chest ached. She cupped his cheek gently. "Especially you." From the hallway, unseen, Caio's eyes stung. He had spent fortunes trying to give his son what this woman gave, with nothing but patience and love. But Fabiana watched too, and her jealousy sharpened into cruelty. She began to weave a narrative subtle and poisonous. To the cook, "Don't you think Valentina spends too much time in the game room instead of helping here?" To the gardener, "Strange, isn't it, how she talks to the boy like his mother, almost manipulative." To the chauffeur, "Careful, or she'll have everyone in this house wrapped around her finger." The staff, bound by hierarchy, nodded politely. But the seeds were planted, and soon whispers began to creep through the corridors. One evening, Caio returned from work earlier than usual. The sun was low, the garden bathed in golden light. He paused on the terrace, watching as Valentina crouched beside Matthew's wheelchair, both of them laughing as they blew soap bubbles into the air. Matthew clapped his hands as the bubbles floated, fragile rainbows bursting in the breeze. "Look, Daddy," Matthew cried, spotting him. "Mommy Valentina says each bubble is a wish. Isn't that true, Mommy?" Valentina's cheeks flushed, caught between joy and embarrassment. "It's just a game," she murmured. But Caio saw the truth. His son wasn't just playing, he was alive again. Later that night, in the privacy of his study, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared into the amber liquid. He knew he was walking a knife's edge. To embrace what he saw meant scandal, judgment, perhaps even ruin. But to deny it meant condemning his son to loneliness. Fabiana, however, had no such hesitation. That night, she sat at her vanity, plotting by candlelight. The room smelled of expensive perfume, but her thoughts were rancid. "She thinks kindness makes her untouchable," she muttered at her reflection. "She thinks because Matthew adores her, Caio will too. But she doesn't know me." Her eyes flicked to a small velvet box tucked away in the drawer, a pearl necklace once worn by Livia. Family heirloom. Priceless. A plan began to take shape. Dark and precise. "What better way to end a maid's fairy tale," she whispered, "than to expose her as a thief?" The next morning passed like any other. Valentina hummed while dusting the shelves. Matthew waited eagerly in the game room, and Caio immersed himself in business calls. But beneath the surface, the mansion was preparing for betrayal. That night, when the house was finally still, Fabiana slipped quietly from her room. She moved like a shadow down the long corridor, barefoot to muffle sound. The velvet box pressed cold against her palm. The maid's quarters were small, tucked behind the kitchen. She eased the door open, stepping inside. Valentina was asleep, exhaustion pulling her into heavy dreams. Fabiana crouched beside the narrow bed, lifted the thin mattress, and slid the box underneath. Her lips curved into a cruel smile. "Let's see how long the prince calls you mommy once you're branded a thief." She slipped out as silently as she had come, her heart racing with the thrill of triumph. But what she did not know was that Matthew, restless and thirsty, had woken in the night. He had heard the creak of floorboards, the soft squeal of hinges, the faint rustle of fabric. He had rolled his wheelchair quietly down the hall unseen, his wide eyes peering into the shadows, and from the doorway of his room, he had watched his aunt plant the velvet box beneath Valentina's bed. The boy said nothing, not that night, not the next morning. But the secret burned inside him, heavy and dangerous. He was only 7, yet he understood enough. The woman he loved as a mother was being framed, and he knew, one way or another, the truth would come out. In the days that followed, Fabiana's trap tightened. She spoke sweetly at breakfast, played the role of the dutiful aunt, smiled graciously at the staff. But beneath that mask, she was a predator waiting to strike. Caio, unaware, tried to balance his world. Meetings, contracts, boardrooms during the day, Matthew's fragile happiness and Valentina's quiet presence at night. But doubt gnawed at him more each day, fed by Fabiana's whispers, and Valentina. She simply kept giving her heart, unaware that the very walls of the mansion were closing in on her. The storm was almost ready to break, and when it did, it would tear apart every bond they had built.